It is a curious thing how destruction rarely begins with a trumpet blast. Very seldom does the downfall of a man, a nation, or even a soul announce itself with violence at the threshold. It begins instead with neglect, with the little turning away of the eyes, with the quiet decision that something is too small to matter, too trivial to guard, too unworthy of our full attention. And yet it is upon these little beginnings that the great edifices of ruin are built, stone by stone, until at last what seems secure collapses under its own forgotten weight. We imagine that loss must come in the form of a thief breaking through the night, but in truth the more common thief is the one we ourselves invite by indifference, by looking elsewhere, by saying, tomorrow, when the hour calls for today. It is always the small hinge that swings the great door, and it is always the seed, unseen, that determines the tree which will one day overshadow the house. Think of the man who has a field and notices a weed sprouting in the corner. He says to himself, it is only a weed, and the field is wide. A few roots cannot threaten the harvest. And so he leaves it, day by day, until what was once one weed becomes a patch, and the patch becomes a thicket. And when harvest comes he finds the grain choked, the soil exhausted, and the yield diminished beyond repair. He does not remember the first day, when the weed was young, for that moment seemed beneath notice, but the price of ignoring it has swallowed the whole. So it is with the life of the mind and the heart. A compromise too small to trouble the conscience, an indulgence excused because it is brief, an anger allowed to rest overnight, an untruth spoken because it makes the day smoother. These things, like weeds, grow silently in the unattended corners. And when they are at last seen for what they are no longer weeds but forests. And the man who once thought himself a master of the field has become its slave. The danger of small beginnings lies in their invisibility to our pride. We like to imagine that we are too wise to be ensnared by anything petty. We expect temptation to roar like a lion, but it creeps like a mouse, nesting in the walls until the beams are gnawed and the house leans upon its foundation. And yet how often we brush it aside. The lie we tell ourselves is that vigilance is only required for the great battles, the mighty decisions, the monumental choices that history remembers. But what history records is only the harvest of what was long sown in secret soil. The man who betrays his friend did not begin the day before. He began when he allowed resentment to whisper unanswered. The nation that collapses into tyranny did not collapse in 1 hour. It began when justice was bent, once, twice, until men ceased to notice that it was bent at all. The ruin was not sudden, only the discovery of it. It is here that the tragedy deepens, for neglect is not only the seed of ruin, but the thief of strength. Every time a man says, "This is too small to guard," he is unlearning vigilance. He is teaching himself to be blind. And blindness practiced becomes blindness perfected, until at last he cannot see what would once have horrified him. That is the great danger, not merely that the small thing grows into a great danger, but that in the meantime the man grows accustomed to ignoring danger altogether. He has not only lost the battle, but lost the very power to know there was a battle. And once the eyes are trained to dismiss, the ears trained to ignore, the heart trained to excuse, then when the great crisis finally does arrive, it is already too late, for the watchman has long since abandoned his post. Consider the story of the cracked vessel. A potter makes a jar, and in the kiln it develops a hairline fracture. The flaw is invisible at first, and the vessel appears strong. It is filled, and it holds. It is carried, and it bears the weight. But with every filling and every carrying the crack deepens, unseen, until one day at the moment of greatest need, when the jar is required to carry water across the long desert, it bursts in the hand of the one who trusted it. What destroyed the jar was not the desert, nor the weight, but the small flaw left unattended at the beginning. And so it is with the human soul. It is not usually in the storm that we are first undone, but in the quiet hours where we deemed a fracture too slight to repair. By the time the storm comes, the strength to endure has already leaked away, and yet men continue to treat the little things as trifles. They despise the small act of faithfulness, thinking it beneath their dignity, while in truth dignity is born in those very acts. They laugh at caution, calling it weakness, when in truth it is the mother of wisdom. They tell themselves that the great fall cannot come to them, and so they leave the gate unlatched, the lamp untrimmed, the watchtower unmanned, and the very arrogance that convinces them of safety ensures their destruction. For pride blinds us to the significance of beginnings, while humility alone can see that eternity itself hangs upon what we do with the next small choice. A man may say, "What is one word, one look, one thought?" But one word may wound a friend beyond repair, one look may harden a heart, one thought may grow into a chain that binds the will. Nothing stands alone. The smallest coin, dropped into the river, sets ripples moving toward shores unseen. The hand that sows one seed has already chosen the harvest. If you ignore the seed because it is small, you may one day sit weeping beneath the tree that grew from it, whose branches you cannot cut down and whose roots you cannot tear out. The poets tell us that great fires are born of sparks, and the wise know it to be true. But we, in our folly, go on brushing aside the sparks as though they are playthings, until the field is in flames and the village in ashes. And then we cry out against fate, as though fate had kindled the blaze, when all along it was our own hand that would not stoop to pour the cup of water on the spark when it was small enough to quench. The refusal to bend down in time leads always to the moment when bending is useless, when no strength of man can undo what might once have been undone by a child's hand. Thus, the danger of small beginnings is twofold: that they grow into ends we cannot escape, and that they corrupt the very sight by which we might have recognized them. If ever you wonder why some fall so swiftly, do not imagine it was swift. Imagine instead the long years of neglect, the unnoticed concessions, the quiet excuses, the little turnings aside, each too small to matter, until at last the sum of them all was greater than the man who bore them. And if ever you are tempted to say, "This does not matter," remember that ruin never looks like ruin when it is young. It is one of the oldest temptations known to man, and yet perhaps the most subtle, that when life becomes soft, when the path is smooth, when the cup is full, the eyes grow heavy and the heart forgets what it was made for. Comfort, that harmless word, so often hailed as a blessing, has hidden within it a sting more deadly than hardship itself. For hardship awakens, discomfort shakes, pain cries out for attention, but comfort lulls, comfort soothes, comfort whispers that all is well even as the foundations crack beneath the floorboards. To be deceived by an enemy is dangerous, but to be deceived by the couch on which one reclines is more deadly still, for it blinds not by force but by pleasure, and the man who delights in blindness will never seek to see again. Think of the traveler on a long road. When the sun is hot, the wind fierce, and the way steep, he keeps his eyes open. Every stone matters, every shadow alerts him, every sound sharpens his pace. His body aches, but his mind is alive. Yet let that same traveler find himself on a soft meadow, the air cool, the stream gentle, the grass like a cushion beneath his feet. And slowly he begins to forget that he is traveling at all. The meadow becomes enough. He lingers, he lies down, he says to himself that the destination can wait. And while he rests, the day passes, the light fades, and the way grows cold and lost. Comfort has done what hardship could not. It has stolen his journey without a struggle. The deception of comfort lies in its promise of safety. It tells us that because the bed is warm tonight, tomorrow will also be secure. It teaches us to mistake the absence of pain for the presence of health. But nothing could be more false. A man may sit in a splendid house with fire in the hearth, wine in his glass, and laughter in his hall, and yet outside, the beams may be rotting, the ground shifting, the storm gathering. The illusion of permanence is the cruelest gift of ease, for it assures us that what we enjoy today will continue without demand, without cost, without vigilance. Yet history is littered with civilizations that feasted while their enemies gathered at the gates, with kings who slept in silk even as the earth shook beneath their palaces. Comfort whispered to them that tomorrow would be as yesterday, and so they laid down their armor, and so they perished without ever lifting a sword. There is also the deception of identity. Comfort tells a man that he is whole, because he feels no lack, that he is strong because he need not fight, that he is wise because he has no questions pressing upon him. And yet the truth of a man is never tested in ease. It is only in trial that strength is revealed, only in hunger that desire is purified, only in thirst that the springs are discovered. A man who has never been pressed may believe himself virtuous, but his virtue is unproven, like a coin untested by fire. The soft life breeds illusions of grandeur, of stability, of character, but when the storm does at last arrive, as storms always do, the comfort-built man discovers he has built his house upon sand. The deceit was not that he lacked strength, but that he never needed to find it, and so he never knew it was absent. It is also a strange truth that comfort breeds forgetfulness. Those who have too much of it forget the cries of those who have none. Their hearts, once tender, grow numb, for the silk muffles the sound of suffering. They cannot bear to see pain, not because they are overwhelmed by compassion, but because it disturbs their peace. And so they turn away, they shut the door, they close the book, they change the channel, they say, "It is not my concern." And so the comfort that once was a blessing becomes a wall between them and truth. Truth is always sharp, always demanding, and comfort cannot endure the sting of its blade. Better, they think, to sleep in the warm bed of illusions than to wake in the cold dawn of reality. But truth is not silenced by neglect. It waits, it stands, it rises at last with a voice too loud to ignore, and when it does, the comfortable are the least prepared to hear it. For truth, when long denied, comes not as a gentle tutor, but as a thunderclap, and the man who has for years refused to be disturbed by small alarms will be shattered when the final trumpet sounds. Comfort deceives him into thinking he can avoid reality, but in fact it only postpones it, and the longer it is postponed, the more unbearable its arrival becomes. Consider the story of the boiling pot. A frog placed in hot water will leap out at once, but a frog placed in cool water that is slowly heated will remain until it perishes. So it is with comfort. If suffering is sudden, men awake, cry out, fight, resist. But when ease grows little by little, day by day, when it wraps around us like a soft cloak, when it steals the sharpness of vision without pain, then by the time the truth arrives it is too late, for the will to leap is gone. We think we are secure, but we are only sluggish. We think we are blessed, but we are being boiled alive. And yet men run after comfort as if it were the highest good. They design their lives to avoid every hardship. They build walls against inconvenience. They pursue pleasure as though it were purpose. And all the while the soul within them grows weaker, not stronger, for it is never exercised. A muscle unworked atrophies, and a heart untested withers. The man who has never known hunger cannot taste gratitude. The man who has never been opposed cannot know courage. The man who has never been shaken cannot know what it is to stand firm. Comfort robs him not by taking away, but by giving too much, and the giving is so gentle that he does not see what is being stolen, his very self. There is a peculiar irony here, for many who flee from discomfort do so in search of life, and yet by fleeing they lose it. They seek to be spared pain, but in being spared they are also spared growth. They long to avoid wounds, but without wounds they never heal into something greater. The tree that grows in a sheltered greenhouse is soft, its bark thin, its roots shallow. But the tree that grows on the cliffside, beaten by winds, stretched toward light, tested by storms, that tree stands firm when all others fall. Comfort tells us that to be unshaken is to be safe, but in truth to be unshaken is to be unformed, and the soul that has never been pressed by truth is no soul at all, but a shadow. Thus the deception of comfort is not only that it blinds us to truth, but that it blinds us willingly. Unlike pain, which we resist, comfort we embrace. We are not dragged into it but run eagerly toward it, and by the time we realize its chains, we no longer wish to be free. That is the subtle cruelty of ease. It makes the prison so pleasant that the prisoner cannot imagine leaving, even when the world outside is where he belongs. And so he remains, and so he perishes, not by force, but by the sweetest lullaby ever sung to man. Rest now, all is well, tomorrow will be the same. There are moments in life when the weight of a single word outweighs the sum of 1,000 deeds. A man may labor all his years, he may toil faithfully, he may even live in a manner upright and commendable. Yet when the hour arrives in which truth must be spoken, and he keeps his mouth closed, all his earlier faithfulness is tarnished by that silence. For silence, though it appears harmless, is not always neutral. In times when wrong strides boldly across the stage, when falsehood builds its throne, when injustice parades as law, silence is not absence but consent. It is not merely that nothing is said, but that nothing is resisted, and in that vacuum evil flourishes like mold in darkness. We deceive ourselves into thinking that speech is optional, that silence is safe, that by holding our tongues we keep ourselves untainted. But silence is seldom safe. It is not a shelter but a snare. For while the one who speaks risks rejection, the one who is silent risks far more: the betrayal of conscience, the corrosion of courage, and the slow dying of the soul. When truth calls and the voice does not answer, something within shrivels, as though a living organ has been starved of air. And the man who has once betrayed truth by silence finds it easier to do so again, until at last he can no longer even hear the summons. What began as one moment of hesitation becomes a lifetime of complicity. Think of the courtroom where an innocent man stands accused. Witnesses are called, and those who know the truth sit quietly in the gallery, telling themselves that someone else will speak, someone else will rise, someone else will carry the weight. But no one does. And so the lie is crowned as truth, and justice dies, not because the liar was powerful, but because the honest were silent. That is the terrible price of inactions. Evil does not need to be strong. It only needs good men to keep their mouths shut. It is the same in the marketplace, in the home, in the chambers of government. When the lie is small, silence says, it is too trivial to correct. When the lie is larger, silence says, it is too dangerous to oppose. And so, by degrees, the habit of silence grows until it becomes a second skin. And the man who once thought himself virtuous finds that he has become a servant of falsehood, not by word, but by the lack of one. Silence is like a seed that reproduces itself. Each unspoken word begets another, each neglected protest breeds more, until the tongue has been trained not to move at all. There is also a terrible illusion in silence, the illusion that it preserves peace. We tell ourselves that to remain quiet is to keep the waters still, that to speak truth would only stir trouble, break harmony, divide friends. And so we imagine that by saying nothing we are healers. But this is a false healing, the kind that binds up a wound without cleansing it. Beneath the bandage infection festers, and when at last the bandage is removed the wound is worse than before. True peace cannot be built on silence. For peace is not the absence of noise but the presence of justice. To withhold truth in the name of peace is to betray both truth and peace, and in the end, the silence we hoped would calm the waters only allows the storm to grow until it breaks upon us with tenfold force. Consider how history remembers its cowards. It is not the tyrant alone who bears the blame for oppression, but the millions who stood by, nodding or looking away. It is not the corrupt alone who destroyed nations, but the neighbors who whispered in kitchens that things were wrong yet never raised their voices beyond the door. The tyrant without the silent crowd is powerless, the corrupt without the silent majority is exposed. Silence is the oxygen of evil, and every quiet breath we take in the presence of wrong is another gust that keeps its fire alive. And what of the personal cost? For silence is not only betrayal of the world, but betrayal of the self. A man who refuses to speak what he knows to be true mutilates his own integrity. He divides himself into two, the inner man who sees clearly, and the outer man who pretends not to see. That division, once established, spreads like a crack through every part of his being. He cannot pray honestly, for he is not honest with himself. He cannot love honestly, for love requires truth. He cannot even rest honestly, for his silence haunts him in the night. There is no rest in the conscience that has gagged itself. And the longer silence reigns, the deeper the fracture becomes, until the man is no longer whole, but a hollow shell. It is often said that courage is rare, but the real rarity is not courage itself, but the willingness to pay its cost. For courage in speech almost always brings some form of loss, the loss of approval, the loss of safety, the loss of comfort. And so men calculate, and in their calculation they choose silence, thinking it cheaper. Yet the true arithmetic is the opposite. Silence is always the costliest choice. It costs the soul its strength. It costs the community its truth. It costs the world its justice. To speak may risk a moment's rejection, but to be silent is to guarantee a lifetime of regret. Better to bear the wound of another's anger than to bear the poison of one's own cowardice. There is also a strange mercy in speech, for even when truth wounds, it is the wound that heals. A surgeon cuts to save, not to destroy, and truth spoken in season is like the blade that removes rot before it consumes the body. Silence, by sparing the pain of the cut, spares the disease as well, and the body is left to perish from within. Thus, when action is demanded, silence is not kindness but cruelty, not gentleness but betrayal. To refuse to speak when the wound festers is to abandon the patient altogether, and yet the temptation to silence is powerful, for silence is easier. It requires no effort, no risk, no sacrifice. To speak demands that we stand alone if necessary, but to be silent allows us to melt into the crowd. And the crowd is warm, the crowd is safe. The crowd applauds those who do not disturb its slumber. To speak is to be set apart, to be called names, to be misunderstood. But let it be so. For the truth has never depended on numbers, and justice has never been measured by popularity. If the price of speech is loneliness, then it is a loneliness born in the company of prophets and martyrs, of saints and sages, of all those who chose to speak though the world hated them for it. Silence wins applause today, but speech wins eternity. There is also this to remember: silence is never truly silence. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the place where truth is withheld does not remain empty. Lies rush in to fill it, falsehood builds its nest there, corruption sets up its throne. By saying nothing, we have not preserved neutrality, we have ceded ground. The world does not wait for us to decide, it advances without us. Every time we close our mouths in the face of wrong, we are not freezing the moment in safety. We are giving victory to the wrong. Silence is not a pause but a surrender. And the greatest tragedy is that silence is contagious. One person quiets his voice, another sees and follows, until a whole people have gagged themselves with fear. And then, when one finally dares to speak, his voice sounds strange, even offensive, to ears long accustomed to the lull of quiet. This is why the cost of silence is not borne by the silent alone, but by all who live around them. The chain is forged link by link, and each tongue that withholds truth adds another shackle until the whole generation is bound. Therefore, when the hour comes that action is demanded, when the lie must be named, when the injustice must be confronted, to be silent is not to protect oneself but to destroy oneself. It is not to preserve life but to lose it. For what is a life lived in silence but a slow surrender of all that is worthy of living for? The voice given to man was not meant to mutter only of trivialities, but to ring out when truth and falsehood clash. To keep it silent in that hour is to misuse the very gift that makes us human. The beasts are silent because they have no voice. The cowards are silent because they will not use theirs. The cost of silence, then, is everything. It costs the truth its witness. It costs the oppressed their defender. It costs the speaker his integrity. It costs the world its justice. And though at first it seems cheaper than speaking, though at first it feels safer, in the end it exacts a price so unbearable that no comfort can repay it. The silence of one generation becomes the ruin of the next, and the silence of one soul becomes the death of its own spirit. There are few things more perilous to the soul than the voice which whispers, "I need no counsel. I need no correction. I am sufficient as I am." This is the hidden root of pride, the silent arrogance that deafens a man to wisdom, even while wisdom stands at his very door knocking. For what does pride say, if not this? That light is unnecessary, that mirrors are deceitful, that friends are meddling, that truth itself is an intruder when it does not flatter. And what more dangerous state can there be than to be lost yet unwilling to be shown the way, sick yet unwilling to hear of medicine, blind yet unwilling to admit the darkness? Pride does not always rage, as men imagine. More often it smiles, it nods. It cloaks itself in dignity. The proud man is not always the one who boasts loudly. Often he is the one who listens politely, but never truly hears, who appears agreeable, but within has already dismissed every word not born of his own lips. He mistakes agreement with himself for wisdom, and so he is never wiser than yesterday, for yesterday is the measure of his entire world. And yet a life that never learns is a life that never grows, and a soul that never grows is a soul already withering. The blindness of pride is not merely that it refuses to see truth, but that it convinces the man that he already sees all that can be seen. Thus he walks in darkness while calling it light, and believes himself free while stumbling in chains. Consider the teacher who corrects his pupil. The humble pupil blushes perhaps, but he listens, and by listening he becomes more than he was. The proud pupil, however, hardens his face, dismisses the correction, and goes on repeating his errors, not because they are true but because he will not bend. He says, "I am not mistaken," and in saying so he closes the only door by which wisdom might have entered. Correction is never pleasant, but it is always precious. It is the chisel that shapes the stone, the fire that purifies the gold. To despise it is to despise the very process by which the soul becomes whole. Yet pride does precisely this. It rejects the chisel, flees the fire, and so remains forever crude, forever impure, forever unfinished. The blindness of pride shows itself also in its disdain for the past. It says, "Those who came before me knew little, but I know much. They were bound by superstition, but I am free by reason." It forgets that every age has its own darkness, that the blindness of yesterday is no greater than the blindness of today. And so the proud age mocks the wisdom of its fathers, discarding treasures as though they were rubble, while embracing its own follies as though they were jewels. But humility remembers that truth is larger than one generation, larger than one man, larger even than all mankind. Humility bows to learn, while pride stands tall to dismiss, and in dismissing loses all. Pride blinds also by turning correction into offense. The humble heart hears rebuke and grieves for its fault. The proud heart hears rebuke and burns with anger, not because the rebuke was false but because it was true. To tell a proud man he is wrong is to wound his idol, for his idol is himself. And so he lashes out, not against error, but against the one who dared to uncover it. How many friendships have been destroyed? How many families divided? How many nations torn apart because men would rather destroy the messenger than receive the message? Pride cannot bear to be wrong, and so it multiplies wrongs to preserve its illusion. Thus the small correction that might have healed becomes the great offense that festers into hatred. And yet the irony is this: the man who refuses correction imagines he is strong, but he is in truth most fragile. For strength is not the inability to be corrected, but the ability to endure correction and emerge better. The oak that stands unbending may seem mighty, but when the storm comes it snaps. The reed that bends survives. Pride stiffens the soul until it cannot bend, and when the storm of truth comes, as it always does, the proud soul shatters. Humility alone has the flexibility to endure, to learn, to grow. And so the very thing pride despises, correction, is the very thing that would have preserved it. There is also a blindness to consequence. Pride convinces the man that he can ignore every warning, silence every voice, dismiss every counsel, and yet somehow escape the end that others have met. He thinks himself the exception, the single soul immune to gravity, the one sailor who can laugh at storms without ever capsizing. But the laws of truth are not bent for pride. They break the proud as easily as the humble. The cliff does not soften because the traveler insists it is not there. The fire does not cool because the proud man calls it harmless. The wages of folly do not shrink because pride declares itself wise. Pride blinds him to the inevitable, and so he walks straight into ruin while calling it triumph. Consider the parable of the king and the mirror. A wise counselor brought to his king a mirror, saying, "Behold, O Lord, your face." The king looked and saw blemishes, lines of age, shadows of weariness. He grew angry, saying, "This glass lies. I am strong. I am unblemished. I am the fairest of men." And so he smashed the mirror and cast out the counselor. But in smashing the mirror, did the blemishes disappear? No, they only deepened, unseen, until at last the king was mocked by his enemies and abandoned by his friends, not because he was weak at the beginning, but because he refused to see his weakness and strengthen it. So it is with pride. It smashes the mirrors, banishes the voices, silences the truth, and yet the flaws remain, growing until they bring shame before all. Thus the blindness of pride is not harmless, it is fatal. For the man who refuses correction cannot change, and the man who cannot change cannot be saved from his own ruin. Every correction refused is a step further into darkness. Every rebuke rejected is another brick in the wall between the soul and truth. And at last, when the wall is high enough, no light enters, no counsel is heard, no truth penetrates. The man has built his own prison, and the name of the prison is pride. And what shall we say then, but that to ignore correction is to choose destruction? The blindness of pride may flatter for a season, but its end is always shame. The humble man may stumble, but he rises wiser. The proud man may stride boldly, but he falls without remedy. For the universe is not bent to flatter him, it is bent to truth. And truth, whether received or rejected, always has the last word. Therefore, let us not despise correction, nor grow offended when truth rebukes us, nor imagine that to reject counsel is strength. Let us instead remember that humility is the path of life, and that to bend before wisdom is not weakness, but the very definition of strength. For the blindness of pride ends only in ruin, but the sight of humility leads to life everlasting. There are few habits more destructive, and yet more quietly tolerated than the habit of delay. It creeps into the soul as a whisper, soft and persuasive. Tomorrow will be soon enough. There is still time. The choice can wait. And because the whisper brings comfort, because it soothes our fears, we welcome it as though it were a friend. But delay is no friend. It is a thief. It steals the sharpness of conviction, the urgency of truth, the clarity of conscience, and leaves us weaker each time we listen to it. It is not merely a postponement of action, it is the erosion of the will itself. The peril of delay lies first in its deceit. We tell ourselves that postponement is not refusal. We soothe the conscience with the illusion that later will be different from now. Yet later is never different. The man who will not act today will not act tomorrow, for tomorrow is born of today. To say, "I will do it later," is to say, "I will not do it now," and each, "not now," becomes a stone added to the wall between intention and deed. At last, the man finds himself hemmed in, unable to move, for the wall has grown too high. Delay has transformed possibility into impossibility, not with one dramatic blow, but with the slow and steady laying of bricks, day after day. Consider the tale of the debtor. A man owes a great sum. He knows the day of reckoning is near. Yet each morning he says, "Tomorrow I will settle it." Meanwhile, the interest grows, the weight increases, the time shortens. And when the appointed day arrives, he is unprepared, not because he lacked warning, but because he wasted it. So it is with every duty of the soul. We think that time is an ally, but time is always moving, always diminishing, always carrying us closer to the hour when the decision will be demanded, whether we are ready or not. Delay is never neutral, it is always costly, always draining, always tightening the cords that bind us. There is also the peril of dullness. When a conviction first arises, it burns brightly. The conscience stirs, the heart quickens, the soul feels alive. But if that conviction is not acted upon, the fire fades. The voice of conscience grows quieter, the urgency softens, until at last the man wonders why he ever felt it at all. Delay quenches the flame not with water, but with time. And once quenched, the flame is not easily rekindled. How many men have felt the call to mend a relationship, to turn from a harmful path, to begin a noble work, only to delay, and in delaying, lose the very desire to do it. Delay does not preserve the opportunity, it destroys it. And then there is the peril of unforeseen change. We imagine that the future will resemble the present, that the chance we pass today will wait patiently for us tomorrow. But life is not so gentle. The door that is open today may be closed tomorrow. The friend we might reconcile with today may be gone tomorrow. The strength we possess today may wither tomorrow. The opportunity we assume eternal may vanish without warning. To delay is to gamble with the unknown. To bet that time will hold still for our convenience. But time never holds still. It marches on, sweeping away moments as swiftly as a river carries leaves, and what is lost forever. Delay also breeds cowardice. Each time a man postpones action, he trains his will to weakness. He tells himself, "I will be braver tomorrow." But tomorrow he is weaker, not stronger, for courage unused does not grow, it decays. Delay is the schoolmaster of timidity, the trainer of cowards. And at last the man who once thought himself only hesitant discovers that he is incapable of acting at all. He has practiced postponement until postponement has become his only habit, and when the great crisis comes, demanding decision, he finds that the power to decide has been stolen long ago by the small delays of ordinary days. Think of the soldier on the battlefield. The moment comes to advance, the signal is given, but he hesitates. In that hesitation, the enemy gains ground, the comrades fall, the battle is lost. He tells himself that it was only a moment's delay, yet in war a moment is the difference between victory and ruin. So it is in life. The battle of truth against falsehood, of good against evil, of light against darkness, is not lost by grand refusals alone, but by countless small hesitations. Each delay, each pause, each postponed word of courage tilts the field until defeat is inevitable. The peril of delay is seen most clearly at life's end. How many, standing on the brink of eternity, look back with sorrow, not for what they did, but for what they never did. They meant to forgive, but they delayed. They meant to repent, but they delayed. They meant to love, to serve, to speak, to build, but always tomorrow, always later, until the days were gone and no tomorrows remained. There is no grief sharper than the grief of wasted time, no regret deeper than the regret of delay, for the opportunities lost are not recoverable, and the words unsaid echo forever in silence. And yet the remedy is so simple. It is to act, today, this moment, without excuse, without postponement, to answer the voice of conscience at once, to do the duty while it is before us, to seize the chance while it is in our grasp. Delay whispers, wait, truth commands, now, and to obey, no, is to live, to grow, to fulfill. To obey, wait, is to wither, to weaken, to be swept away. Therefore let us not be deceived by the soft lie of delay. Let us not imagine that time will wait for us, or that opportunities will return unchanged. Let us instead live as those who know that every moment is a gift, every call a summons, every choice a seed. For the peril of delay is that it steals not only today but tomorrow, not only opportunity but destiny. But the reward of readiness, of decisive action, of obedience to the present call, is life abundant, rich, and whole. And so, when the moment calls, let us not linger at the threshold, let us not murmur, later, later, but let us rise and step forward. For the peril of delay is death, but the blessing of decision is life.